in that specific function. Something you've also noticed before in the context of functions, when we actually wanted to convert our input to an integer, then we wrote something like val input as integer, and we set this equal to input dot to integer or null. So you can see that's also how we get all the functions that we could currently call in this context. So this is quite a different way of calling a function, right? Because we had to call a function and then pass the actual parameters to this function here in these parentheses. But what we did before is we took our input, we took our parameter, and then called a function on that parameter with this dot notation. So what is the difference here, and why does it work like this once and like this at another time? Well, that's another feature that Kotlin offers us, and it's called extension functions. So with extension functions, we can achieve that we can call a function on an actual object, on an actual variable, string, array, whatever. And that also does not have any specific changes in behavior. So every single extension function we can also write as a normal function with a normal parameter here in these parentheses. But it does have a difference in regards to readability. And it's actually a really cool Kotlin feature because sometimes it just reads much better if we see something like, okay, input to int or null, or input dot reversed, rather than reversed input. That's not a very human way to say that you want to reverse something. So how would that work to define such an extension function? Well, that works by going to our reverse function, and all we need to do is we need to specify the type of variable or object that we can call this function on. So now we don't need the string to reverse anymore as a normal parameter here in these parentheses, so we can really get rid of that and just have opening, closing parentheses to say, no, we don't have any direct arguments in this function. But before the function name, we now say, this function can be called on strings by saying string.reversed. And we could still specify more arguments here. So we could still have a number again, for example, which we could use here. Obviously, we can only call a function on a single type of argument. But if we need more parameters than that, we can pass these here in the parentheses. In this case, we only need one parameter, which is the string we called this function on already. So this is totally fine to not have any arguments here in these parentheses. But now we get some errors here because we don't have this clear string to reverse anymore. So how do we now reference the string that we called this function on inside of this function? Well, and that works via this. So this is a keyword in Kotlin that we can use in different contexts, but in the context of an extension function, this refers to, if we tap this refers to the string that this function was called on. So what we could do is we could say this that last index and this at the index of I. And for some of these calls to this, we can actually also omit this. So if we remove this here, you can see we can still reference last index because this is implicitly added by the compiler. In some other cases, like using such operators based on this string, so the array index operator would also be called an operator. Here we can't omit this anymore because this is quite a weird notation and it wouldn't know which specific object it should refer this index to. So here we do need this. But for all kinds of calls or referenced variables on this object, on the string specifically, we can omit this. So if we now have this function like this, we obviously can't call it like that anymore. But what we can do is we can say we use our input and we call that reversed. There we go. That's our function. And if we again call this, enter a string, something like race car again, then we don't get any outputs. What did I do wrong? Let's first of all remove this input as integer, but that was unused anyways. So we have our input. That is the console input. We then take this input, we reverse it. And the fact that we did not get any console println statement, but somehow an empty line, tells me that this reverse string is actually empty. Let's investigate why. What's kind of odd is that it marks this string here as gray, that it says receiver parameter is never used. So this string that we call this function is never used, even though we referenced this. And I can already spot the issue here, and that goes a bit more in the advanced Kotlin direction. But the thing is that this can be called in multiple contexts, as I said. In the context of an extension function, it references this string. But there's also another type of function, which is actually this block of code here, which we'll get to later in this course. So I don't want to get into that and mix this with these normal functions now. But let's actually go to this and say this at reverse. because with that, we make sure that we actually reference the string we call this on so that we refer to the string in the context of this reverse function. You will understand this better later, but if we now run this again and type race car, we again get an empty output, because we also need to do this for the last index, because otherwise this that is implicitly added again refers to the context of this build string function. Sorry for that if that is a bit confusing right now. It will make more sense later on when we talk about lambda functions. But for now, let's rerun this once more and then putting in race car, and yes, now we also get the proper string that this is a palindrome. So that's something you need to take a bit of care about in extension functions. But other than that, they are really great because you can literally extend any type of variable or object with specific functionality, and then you can just call it like that. And you'll also notice that strings and integers already have a bunch of predefined extension functions. For reversing a string, there is actually also already a predefined function, so we don't need to implement something like that ourselves. It still helps, of course, to understand loops like we did here. But if we actually type input dot, then we can see all those functions that can already be called on string objects. So if we scroll down, for example, we can filter certain strings. We also get to that later. We can format it. So if we have certain placeholders, we can convert a string to lowercase letters. I don't know, we can replace certain characters in the string. And I think there should also be a reversed function in strings. I think we don't see this right now here because we do have our own reversed function, which kind of overrides the other reversed function, but we could test this by removing this one. And we say reversed. You can see there is still this reversed function, which now comes from the Kotlin standard library. So that's the pool of functionality that Kotlin already offers as a language. But let's put this back again